We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers. In other words, you'll be able to buy the car of your choice. We will build automobiles in America again at a rate that nobody could have dreamt possible just a few years ago.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for our final panel looking at the transportation sector. Rachel will now interview Rebecca Higgins, VP of Policy at the Enos Center for Transportation. Albert, hi, welcome. Albert Gore, the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association. Pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you, welcome. And Elaine Buckberg, Senior Fellow at Harvard's Salata Institute for Climate Sustainability. Hi, welcome. And former Chief Economist at General Motors, and you know Rachel Frazin from the Hill. Take it away.
Hi, thank you guys all so much for being here. I think the first question that I want to put to the panel is, EV policy is, on the one hand, something that can be very partisan, and as can sustainable transportation at large. On the other hand, you have Elon Musk in this very prominent role in this administration. What impact, if anything, do you think Elon Musk's position is going to have on sustainable transportation? Would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be happy. I'd be happy to take it. Well, I think Elon's impact and Tesla's impact over the last decade or decade and a half has been really positive in terms of, proving the case about electric vehicles, really demonstrating that EVs are mass market vehicles, demonstrating all the benefits beyond just emissions reductions. So I think, going forward, where we're likely to, be in a similar situation we were in a few years ago, where it's really competition and market forces that are going to drive the industry forward. At this point, I think Tesla plays a really important role there, and we have a much more informed debate, at least around EVs, and a much stronger U.S. manufacturing base for electric vehicles because of, I think, the impact of crowding in investment that Tesla's had over the last decade.
I guess I'll add, in the current role for Elon Musk and DOGE and their approach to the federal programs, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program has been frozen, continues to be frozen. That was poised and still could be poised to be a really important source of building out EV infrastructure. It's not, Tesla has their own network, so it has less of a benefit perhaps to Tesla owners and to Elon Musk's company. But that program, which was $5 billion, was provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Much of it remains unobligated, but states had been planning to spend that money and build out their infrastructure networks. And the budget that was released last week does identify that potentially as going to be rescinded. And so I think that will have the effect of delaying the build out of infrastructure that we think will provide confidence to the consumer that they can purchase electric vehicles and be able to charge that vehicle.
So first, I want to completely agree with Rebecca that of all the programs to support and policies to support EVs, NEVI is the single most catalytic in terms of our research and modeling says that charging has a really disproportionate positive impact on EV adoption. I think it's really important to keep in mind that Tesla has received extensive federal support from initial loans from the Loan Program Office to, if you look at the EVs that were eligible for the EV tax credit last year, for the purchase tax credit, I looked at this through the first 3 quarters, and 75% of the sales of those eligible vehicles were Tesla. So 75% of the EV tax credit dollars went to Teslas and buyers of Teslas last year. But in last summer at some point, Musk said that he would support the removal of that tax credit because he thought it would be more harmful to his competitors than him. So I think Musk is, by his own statements, first playing hardball with his competition, but at the same time is a demonstration of the power of EV industry development around the world.
If I could add one thing, just to add on to what you said, I think Tesla has participated in the NEVI program as well as received grants to that program and through CFI. So I think I would maybe this may be in the realm of speculation, but I would separate out his impact within the administration on freezing these programs from the general administration's approach to freezing these programs. I'm not sure that he has said he's, one way or the other, his feelings about NEVI and CFI, but I do know that Tesla has participated in those programs and benefited from them, and I think the programs have benefited from Tesla's participation as well as all the other companies that have participated, and agree wholeheartedly with what you all said about the importance of those programs.
Rebecca, I was wondering, can you give us an update on sort of that grant funding and also, just sustainable transportation grants more broadly? Where are we? And I recall under the last administration, there were some reports saying, they put all this money towards EV chargers, but only so many chargers have been built. Seems like only a handful. Has there been progress there? And can you give us a status update?
Sure. The program provided $5 billion when it was passed in 2021. And the majority of that was supposed to be distributed to states as formula funding. And states first had to develop plans for how they would build out that infrastructure. States have done so. Then when the Trump administration came in, though, they decided that they would relook at the states' plans, take away the approval that had been previously granted to state plans. And so no money has been spent since. It has remained frozen since the administration. There was quite a balance of unexpended funds. It certainly has been obligated slower than we had hoped. I was on the Hill when we were writing those programs, and I think that the states have worked really hard to take on that role, and they've worked with the state energy offices, but it is a different role than state DOTs have historically played. Building out vehicle servicing infrastructure is just a different model than building roadways, and so I think that there was some learning that had to happen that contributed to the program deploying more slowly than we would have liked. So that's where it currently stands, and as I mentioned, it does appear that they are hoping to rescind those balances that are unobligated, and I think that would be a major hit to the program. With regard to other clean energy programs, I think that the T&I committee's mark for the reconciliation bill also will rescind other aviation, low emission fuels, and other technology funding. Funding for low carbon cement and other materials, which is not counted as part of the transportation emissions, but obviously is part of, is emissions resulting from the transportation sector ultimately, because it's for building our infrastructure. And then there are neighborhood access and other programs that are focused on kind of smart mobility infrastructure will also be potentially rescinded. And so I think that there's a kind of across the board reductions in funding that will help with the emissions reduction.
And so to clarify, the EV charger grants are fully frozen, or
Yes.
What's left are frozen right now, and it seems, or do you believe that Republicans will try to rescind that via reconciliation, or what do you mean rescind? Like, who would be rescinding it?
It wasn't in the T&I committee's bill, but it was the budget from the president appears to be interested in having Congress rescind it. So it could be in a regular appropriations bill. I don't know.
Albert, I wanted to go to you and ask you about the EV tax credits that are a hot topic in reconciliation. What do you expect? Do you expect them to be sunset early? Do you expect them to be eliminated? Do you think they could stay in place? What are we looking at?
Well, it's certainly been a hot topic of debate. we've been making the case that they're incredibly important, particularly with regard to the value of the 45X production tax credit, which is centered around bringing auto manufacturing, battery manufacturing, and upstream mineral refining here to the United States. So I think there's been receptivity to that from folks that may not be so focused on electric vehicles or vehicles generally, but are incredibly focused on battery manufacturing and critical mineral production and refining. And there are over a dozen offtake agreements between U.S. mining and refining companies with U.S. automakers contingent on the value of the 30D tax credit, which is the new clean vehicle credit. I think that there's an emerging understanding of the importance of those offtake agreements, as well as things like joint ventures between, say, Ford and Ioneer, direct investments like GM's investment in Lithium Americas Thacker Pass mine, and what would happen to those if the demand signal of the 30D credit is removed right away or very quickly. That's private sector investment in U.S. mining capacity and refining capacity. It's very, very hard to replicate, and it's very, very important to new operations in the United States, particularly when you're financing projects against a commodity price that is outside of the market's control. It's generally set by China, through their own production, often below their cost to produce. So a very challenging problem, a very good solution that we have and should maintain.
I just want to add on to this. So there's a superb database that tells you where investments in EVs and batteries and other forms of clean energy are in the country, the dollars, the jobs, and the party of the member of the House. For battery investments that would be eligible for 45X, over 80% are in congressional districts currently represented by Republicans. For EV manufacturing investments, over 70%. So the politics of this may be particularly friendly to 45X.
Is this Jay Turner's database?
The big green machine.
Right. Yeah.
And so
It's a good one.
what are you hearing when you have those conversations, especially with Republicans? Are they receptive to that argument, or how have those conversations gone?
They've gone well. And I'll give one example, which is we were out in Reno recently with Congressman Mark Amodei at Redwood's site where they're doing battery recycling at Panasonic's facility, which has been 10 years on. They're making 6 million cells a day there, and it's been incredibly important to the local economy. Congressman Amodei said that the 30D and 45X credits would be a red line for him in reconciliation shortly afterwards. So, I think that's a good data point. There are a number of other members that are really receptive and I think are making the case within the conference, within the process. So, I think a lot of work still to be done.
Elaine, I wanted to ask you, so as we prepare for policy changes or potential policy changes with this administration, be it, tax credits or regulation changes, what are automakers doing, if anything, to respond or to anticipate those changes?
Automakers have been clearly lobbying, and most visibly through things like the Alliance of Automotive Innovators, for retaining all of these policies. It's easy in domestic discussions to focus on EV adoption in the US, but you have to remember this is a powerful global trend, that the biggest market in the world, China, is over 25% pure battery electric vehicle at this point, in this country matched by California. That Europe is running around 15% battery electric vehicle, that every automaker sees this as the future. And frankly, it would be very costly to them to have to invest in completely different new vehicle programs for the United States to stay behind and stay in internal combustion. So they want the EV transition to happen here. And they certainly value federal support to help accelerate that process it's incredibly investment intensive compared to just a world where it was just another internal combustion engine program. And that's before you think about other investments in increasing autonomous features or the complexity and expense of tariffs hitting automakers.
And what about regulations? As Trump, I guess, to put it in his words, prepares to undo the EV mandate, like, are we seeing automakers, invest in fewer EVs, because they won't have to make as many?
I think there's been slowing of timelines and slowing of investments. And while no one is ever entirely explicit, and they've often blamed the consumer, I think that the transitions have often been somewhat more challenging than they've expected. They may have been able to ramp things more slowly. There have been other changes that may have reduced how much the investment they want to make for the American automakers. The UAW contracts reached in the fall of 2024 were substantially more expensive than I think anything they expected. I think that the markets somewhat changed their tolerance between show me how many EVs you're going to make and when you're going to overtake Tesla. And we'll reward you to that too. Well, I still want to see short-term profits, although I'd like to see that. And so there's been recalibration, but I don't think that changes their fundamental view on the market.
So it seems to me like this administration has been very focused on minerals, both sort of domestically and also getting minerals from abroad, including Ukraine. What impact do you think that's going to have on the transportation sector, if anything?
I think you're better
I'm happy
to
to
answer this. Yeah, supply chain is critically important, but I think that with regard to specific minerals, please go ahead.
I think, Ukraine seems to be primarily focused on rare earths, which is a, very specific issue, not necessarily specific to batteries, although it is important it is an important material for vehicles as well as many other applications. As far as securing the supply chain and moving it out of China, which I think has been a focus for many years, there are things underway. The EV industry, I think, has many years of head start here. Some of it through the demand signal in the 30D credit. 30D credit is incredibly laser focused on moving mineral content out of China first and foremost. And into FTA countries. And then similarly with battery components, moving their assembly here up to 100, 100% is the top threshold for eligibility for the 30D credit. It has to be assembled in North America. North America is a whole other challenge right now because there are tariffs involved. But I think, we're working with the administration to make all that workable. I think there is an enormous amount of mineral resources around the world in places like South America and Australia when it comes to lithium. What we're focused on now is bringing refining capacity into the United States because so much of the refining capacity is concentrated in China. That's a very difficult thing. It's time and capital intensive. It takes years of sustained commitment and an understanding of the challenge and how to work around the financial challenges involved with a commodity market that is not necessarily set by market forces when it comes to battery materials. But I think that is one area where we see a lot of alignment in what we've heard in the executive orders and elsewhere out of the administration. And so we're hopeful to make that successful.
Just those rare earths are important in magnets that go in the drive units for EVs that are not necessary for internal combustion engine motors.
That's right.
So Albert, what I'm hearing from you might be that, it's not even so much about where the minerals are mined, it's where they're processed.
Correct.
Are we likely to get, large-scale mineral processing here in the United States or in our allies like there is in China? Like, is that something that is going to happen, and what can be done, if anything, to make that happen?
Well, there are several things happening now. Projects in the pipeline or coming online. So, I mean, both Thacker Pass and Rhyolite Ridge, being Lithium Americas and Ioneers, have processing. So, you know, LPO has played a really important role in those projects. Permitting timelines are incredibly important, but also, again, sort of the fundamental challenge is they're incredibly capital intensive up front, and then you have a certain timeline before you're producing, and you're expecting to sell into a market that has a commodity price that is usually basically controlled by China's overproduction, or, you know, the price at which they put products into the market at a given time. So how do we pull that material into the United States? Tax credits have been an incredibly powerful tool in doing that. And so that is a central case for maintaining them for a meaningful period of time in order to allow those projects to come online.
So, Elaine, I wanted to ask you, I feel like we're seeing a lot of consumer backlash to Tesla because of Musk's politics, as often people who may have been predisposed to buy a Tesla were people who are concerned about the environment, who might vote Democrat, who don't like what this administration is doing. As people trade in or sell those vehicles, are they replacing them with EVs, or are they replacing them with gas-powered cars?
So I think overwhelmingly, EV drivers generally don't want to go back. They love the smoothness, the quietness. They love the not needing to go to the gas station if they can charge at home. But, you know, we were talking earlier about the potential change in the policy landscape, and I really want to talk about some estimates that we've made of how these different policy changes could change EV adoption and the fiscal benefits. And so forgive me, but I just think that's really important for this Hill-based audience. We have modeled the impact of 8 different scenarios of potential changes in federal policy supporting EVs, and how that would impact EV adoption and the fiscal benefits. On one hand, the single biggest negative impact on EV adoption would be taking away all 3 EV tax credits, new, used, and commercial, which hits leases. That would take down EV adoption at 2030 from a baseline current policy forecast of 48% to 42%, but it yields 97.5% of the savings out of any combination you can get of saving about $168 billion over a 10-year budget window. If you were to taking away NEVI, saves $2.6 billion if you sort of stop what it's doing. If you left in place those EV tax credits, it would save about 12 by fewer tax credits. Little, but would take away 3% percentage points of EV sales in 2030 just for a few billion. If you took away everything in IRA, everything in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the California waiver that's clearly at great risk, you're down 16 percentage points of EV sales in 2030. You're down from 48% baseline forecast to 32%. So the combination has nonlinear accelerating effects. At the same time, there's a note of optimism here, because you'd still be at 32%. So in 6 years, we'd still quadruple EV sales, because the transition has many forms of inherent momentum.
Well, I think that we are just about at time. Thank you guys all for a wonderful discussion. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and our panelists. I want to thank all of our fabulous guests this morning and our audience here in the room. Thank you for being here, as well as the thousands of people who tuned in on Fast TV channel on thehill.com and elsewhere. And thanks to our sponsor, Climate Power, for supporting today's program. Once again, I just want to give a special shout out to Rachel Frazin, whose book, Poisoning the Well, is available for sale now. I'm Mike Vaccaro for The Hill and News Nation. Please enjoy lunch on your way out, and thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.